What's the first step? Is getting some kind of testing done to determine where we're at on the spectrum with our microbiome the first step, or how do we begin?
Yeah. So, step one to me is incorporating into your life behaviors and choices that will always increase diversity and increase keystone species, right? So, if you're thinking about, oh my God, my microbiome is probably devastated. I've had multiple rounds of antibiotics in my life. Maybe I was born C-section. I grew up in a part with parents who use a lot of over sterilization in the household, right? We did a lot of things that we know now to be harmful to the microbiome that we didn't know was harmful before. So then you're starting to think, okay, how do I fix this? How do I improve my microbiome? I would have them focus on two outcomes. The two outcomes are increased diversity, increased keystone species, right? So here's how you do that. And it's the beauty of it is it's relatively simple. So to increase diversity, some of the things you can do right off the bat are to increase the diversity of the foods you eat, right? The higher the diversity in your diet, the higher the diversity in your gut microbiome. And the reason for that is because different microbes feed on different macronutrients at different rates, right? So you might take, a root, vegetable, like let's say you take a sweet potato, or you take a different form of a carbohydrate. Let's say you take a pineapple. They have very different carbohydrate structures in one case a vegetable, one case of fruit, or pineapple is actually technically kind of like a seed of some sort, right? And so if you take those two food items, they have very different carbohydrates in them. They will feed different classes of microbes, which require different enzymes to break down the different structures in those carbohydrates. You take lean meat, for example, is going to be different microbes that are going to break that down. Take nuts and seeds and fibers, soluble fibers versus insoluble fibers. You're going to get different microbes that have different capabilities of breaking those down. So the more diverse your diet is, the more diverse your microbiome is going to be. If you just think about like our ancestors, there were some anthropological studies that estimated that early humans consumed upwards of 600 different types of foods annually, right? At best, a Westerner today maybe consumes 15 different types of foods, right? And you just journal it yourself. Take a week's sampling of foods and just look at how many different types of foods you consume. And it's not that much, right? So that's another thing that's driving a lower diversity. So increase the diversity of your diet. That's one. Number two, you can add things like intermittent fasting. Fasting, and it's counterintuitive, actually does increase the diversity of your microbiome. And part of the reason is because when you look at how microbes in the microbiome break down food products, you've got primary digesters, secondary digesters, tertiary digesters, right? The primary digesters will take in the main food that you're consuming, start breaking down the big macromolecules, and then they'll create byproducts from that breakdown. Then there's a whole set of microbes that consume the byproducts. And then they break those down and create new byproducts. And then there's another set of microbes that break down that set of byproducts, right? So each time there's a cycle going through and a stage gating of microbes that become really active because of what the substrate that is available at that time is. Now, one of the reasons why fasting can be very beneficial is if you take in a meal, right? You take a bunch of protein, carbohydrates, fats, and all that, all the primary digesters are now going to work, right? And it's going to take them a while. It's going to take them several hours to start breaking that down. And then once they're done with their work, the secondary digesters go in and they start breaking down the byproducts. But if in that time, more macromolecules come in, more food comes in, the primary digesters are the ones that are going to work most of the time, right? They're doing the first stage of digestion. So the secondary and tertiary guys aren't really getting enough activity. They're not getting enough substrates. They're not getting enough time to start proliferating and do what they're supposed to do. So that timing issue is really important, right? So if you can add in 12, 13, 14 hours in a day, mostly overnight where you're not eating anything, not consuming any foods, that can help the diversity as well. The other thing to think about with diversity is getting outside, being exposed to the environment, the outside environment, right? Especially natural environment. So if you have natural areas around you. Around me, I have a lot of forest preserves to go on hikes and mountain bike rides. If you're on the coast, you can go to the beach, you can go walking along the shore. All of those things increase the diversity of your microbiome because you're engaging in nature. And one of the things I tell people to really enhance that, if you want to enhance the effect of nature on your microbiome, one of the things you can do is just be very deliberate as you're walking through, say you're going on a hike and on a trail, picking up things and touching things, right? Touching leaves, touching barks, picking up rocks, and doing that kind of thing. So physically engaging with nature and then sitting down and eating in nature. That is one of the most natural things because we all sat down on the dirt and ate. Our ancestors did, at least, for the most part of human evolution. And if you look at most of these hunter-gatherer tribes and all that, one of the ways in which they all eat, they all sit around in a circle on the ground and they eat, right? And so you're really engaging with nature and gaining lots of exposure to good microbes outside that will stimulate diversity within your gut microbiome. A fourth thing that you can do is also bring in a pet, right? So dogs, for example, studies have shown households with dogs tend to have people with higher diversity in their gut microbiome because the dogs go out, they bring in a bunch of organisms and they put them all over your house, right? So engaging with that dog, having pets in the household does increase your diversity. Then the last thing to think about, and maybe two things to think about at the end, are not over sterilizing your home, right? So don't use, antimicrobial cleaners on every surface of your home. If you want to antimicrobial your toilet from time to time, fine, or the shower, maybe there's mildew growing, you can do that. But most surfaces in the home does not need to be sterilized, right? Like my desk and dressers and all of that stuff, we never sterilize it, right? The kitchen counter from time to time, if we bring home some raw chicken and raw chicken juice gets on the counter, you do want to sterilize that because you want to get rid of any salmonella that might be on it. But most surfaces in your home do not have to be sterilized. We over-sterilize our environment. So you need to build diversity in your home biome in order to support your own diversity in your gut microbiome, right? And as much as you can, keep the windows and doors and all that open so you expose outside microbes into your internal environment. The last thing that I was mentioning is managing stress. Stress is one of those things that actually reduces diversity. And we all have stress every single day, right? So things that you can do to manage or reduce the impact of stress on your body becomes really, really important in terms of maintaining diversity in the gut microbiome. So those are all the things you can do to add into your lifestyle that cumulatively will have a huge impact on your gut microbiome. Now, how do you specifically increase the keystone species, right, within the microbiome? All those things I talked about will just increase lots of different organisms. These couple things will specifically increase keystone species. Number one, high intake of fiber, right? Mostly soluble fiber, some insoluble fiber, but there's really no upper limit to fiber intake, right? So I shoot for close to 100 grams a day of fiber from a variety of sources, mostly from food. I do some supplementation as well, just even simple things like psyllium husk, right? You can get an additional 15 to 20 grams if you just make a drink out of it. But you can, and chia seeds and a number of different things that you can add in there. But I try to get it mostly from food as much as I can. And I try to calculate that I'm getting somewhere close to 100 grams of fiber a day. That is critically important to feeding the keystone species. Now, on top of fiber, you need prebiotics, and prebiotics are different than fiber. Fiber is kind of roughage, right? Prebiotics are normally oligosaccharides or inulin. So think about fructooligosaccharides or galacto-oligosaccharides or xylo-oligosaccharides. These are typically taken in supplement form, and it's good to do it in supplement form because it's easier to ensure that you're getting the right amount of it, right? So you want somewhere between 3 and 5 grams a day of these oligosaccharides. These oligosaccharides specifically feed keystone species. Most of these keystone species are the only ones that have the capability of breaking down and consuming these oligosaccharides, right? So fiber, lots of it soluble, oligosaccharides. And the third thing is polyphenols. Polyphenols are really important. Polyphenols, of course, come from lots of red and colored fruits and vegetables. Polyphenols act as a potent prebiotic that feed certain types of keystone organisms within your system. So, right? So that's a critical aspect of getting some of the keystone species to increase in their growth as well. So the natural food sources of prebiotics will be things like eating the husk of certain fruits. Or eating the internal parts of the fruits, right? The fibrous components of fruit. So if you think about pineapples, mangoes, kiwis, they will all have some degree of oligosaccharide prebiotics in the husk part and the fibrous part of the fruits. Now, a lot of sources of fiber as well, things like seeds will have some oligosaccharides in there. Mushrooms actually have unique oligosaccharides in there. So you do get them from food. The thing is, it's hard to discern and know that you're getting the right amount, right? With oligosaccharides, dosing is important. Most studies show that there's a certain threshold dose where once you get to that dose and go above, you're really getting the benefits of the oligosaccharides, right? Fructo oligosaccharides are the ones that come from fruits. Xylo oligosaccharides come from certain vegetables. In the case of supplements, the xylo oligosaccharides actually come from the inner part of the corn cob, which nobody really eats that, and so those kind of roughage, and pigs would eat the corn cob, humans just don't, right? And so we throw out a lot of the very fibrous, kind of gritty parts of fruits and vegetables because we don't like that part, but that's where a lot of the oligosaccharides are. Galacto oligosaccharides are ones that come from dairy. And a lot of people avoid dairy anyway. You have to be consuming the full fat dairy in order to pull the galacto-oligosaccharides into the mix. So that's why I say prebiotics, I like to supplement with it because I know I'm getting some from the foods I eat, but it's just really hard to understand if you're getting the right amount. And they're really important, right? So I want to try to get 4 to 5 grams minimum a day, in addition to the fiber that I'm getting, which is separate. Now, also think about prebiotics and fiber functioning a little bit differently in the body. So prebiotics are very specific to the types of bacteria down to the species that they feed. Fiber can feed lots of different bacteria, right? There's lots of microbes that can utilize fiber in your system, but very few that can utilize these specialized prebiotics. Prebiotics tend to have much more complicated structures, carbohydrate structures, than fiber does.
You mentioned the prebiotics, they typically feed the keystone species. And it sounds like fiber feeds the whole spectrum, including the keystone species.
Including keystone, yep. And utilization, and here's a tip about fiber, right? I mentioned that I try to get upwards of 100 grams of fiber a day. Now, if you're someone that's just eating a regular Western diet, you don't want to have 100 grams of fiber tomorrow, right? Your system's going to go into some sort of shock. And you won't even be able to utilize all of that fiber because it takes a little bit of time to start to train your microbiome to utilize the fiber because your microbiome adapts to your diet, right? So if you've had a diet that's largely protein or largely certain types of simple carbohydrates, or maybe you've been doing keto for a while, so you're getting a lot of fat, and now you go, okay, I want to incorporate fiber, you need to bring up the population of all of those microbes that can utilize the fiber, and you need to train them a little bit. So my recommendation for fiber is usually start with a goal of around 10 to 15 grams a day, right? And then each week bump it up by a couple of grams and just get the system ready for it. Oligosaccharides, you can go 1 or 2 grams to begin with if you've never really taken it as a supplementation. Start with a couple of grams, 1 to 2, and then add in 1 to 2 grams a week till you get to that 4 or 5 gram mark. Right, so sort of bring both of those in slowly, or you won't utilize it effectively, and you may get a lot of gas and bloating and things that are making you uncomfortable, which means that people might stop. Right, and that's one of the most common things that occur with fiber is that people start to increase the fiber intake, they get bloaty, they get gaseous because the wrong microbes are utilizing it in the wrong way, and it takes a little bit of time to adapt the system to actually utilizing the fiber properly.
If you enjoyed that clip, you're going to want to head over here and catch a full episode. I'll see you over there.
Adding spores to a gut microbiome in 3 weeks increased the diversity of the gut microbiome by almost 25 to 30%. And it increased the growth of keystone species, and it brought down pathogens. So the spores are like the police or the orchestrator.